So the next step then is choosing the right outsourcing business model for your work. Um, there are many different outsourcing models, and that's something which a lot of clients don't appreciate, which is a fatal mistake. So just to give an example of this, the classic example is the difference between a freelancer and remote staff. So I don't know how many of you have perhaps heard of sites like Elance or Odesk or People Per Hour. What you have is a lot of clients utilizing these services for basically remote staff. And that's when they go and get their fingers burnt. So just to give an example, let's say, for instance, you have an office here in London and you had a branch office in Manchester. If you hired an employee to work from your office in Manchester, or if you hired a freelancer to work from home in Manchester, would those two models give you the same result and experience? I would argue they wouldn't. An employee is an employee and a freelancer is a freelancer. So appreciate and respect the differences between the different models. If you don't do that, things are going to go wrong, just like it would locally. If I hired an employee, if I was working from London and I hired an employee in Manchester, I can work with that individual in a much different way than I could somebody working from their house in Manchester. And that's something which often gets ignored when outsourcing overseas. So do keep that in mind, because it is an absolutely fatal error to blur the different models. And just on that note as well, even the word outsourcing is incorrectly used. This presentation actually shouldn't have been called How to Outsource, it should have been called How to Offshore. So that's a good example of how the industry is very badly misrepresented. We don't even use the correct terms when they should be used. So yeah, definitely make sure you respect the differences between the different models. So now that you have your checklist from step 3 or your list of requirements of your work, what you now want to do is just basically match it up with all the different models and look at which model best aligns with the needs and requirements of your work. So there are 3 main models. The first is freelancing, the second is remote staffing, and the third is project or process outsourcing. So how do you know which model best aligns with the needs and requirements of your work? Well, basically what you need to do is repeat the process you did in step 3, analyze and evaluate the different models. And if you invest a little bit of time into this process, it will become quite apparent how those models work and whether they sync up with the needs and requirements of your work. So just to start with, I'll go over it with you briefly. But if we take the first example of freelancers, here, just think about local freelancers for a moment. A local freelancer is somebody who's self-employed. And you normally engage with a freelancer on a short-term contract, right? Well, it's exactly the same when you offshore. So you don't really project manage a freelancer, but you do give them guidelines. Freelancers work with multiple clients, just like they do here locally in the UK. It's the same when you offshore. So you're going to get limited levels of interaction and collaboration with them because they have several clients that they're working for. That's quite obvious. So when you start thinking about all this, it does start to become very, very clear and obvious, and that's how you outsource successfully. And because of this, because you don't really project manage a freelancer and because you have limited interaction with them, this model is more suitable for short-term, low-budget projects, and it's not really suitable for high tacit knowledge, work with a high tacit knowledge component in it. So when do things go wrong with freelancers? I touched on this a little bit earlier. Generally, they go wrong when people start to hire freelancers to work as employees. And that's quite obvious when you think about how a freelancer works. They work from home, they have limited hardware, infrastructure, and just if you appreciate, let's say, for instance, a freelancer working from a country like India or the Philippines, working from home can mean something very different to working from home here in the United Kingdom. So if you have somebody who's working from home in, I don't know, China or the Philippines or India, and their internet connection is consistently breaking, how is that individual going to work with you on a daily basis? It's not going to work. And that's why freelancing often goes wrong for a lot of clients when they start hiring these individuals as full-time employees. It can sometimes work if you get lucky, but if you have a project which is worth £200,000, I wouldn't recommend taking that risk. So just think in these terms. With regards to remote staff, remote staffing is basically a mirror of hiring employees locally in the United Kingdom. So it's the same process as you would work with somebody locally here in the UK. That's how you would work with a remote employee or a virtual employee halfway across the world. So what that means is that you would retain project management control. You would have high levels of interaction with them, and they're suitable for high tacit and explicit knowledge transfer because you have that project management and you have those high levels of interaction with them. So remote staff are more suitable for long-term, ongoing daily work. So let's say, for instance, if, I don't know, your project was, you envisaged it was going to take you a year to complete, or if it was just ongoing daily work which you wanted to outsource, then you'd be better off hiring a remote employee. And that's quite obvious, really, because again, if we draw a parallel between hiring locally and offshore, when you think about it, even here, if you had a year's worth of work to do, you'd probably want to hire an employee to do that. You wouldn't really get a freelancer to do it. And so that's why really the correct word for remote staffing is actually offshoring. It's not outsourcing because you're retaining project management control. Really, remote staff are in-house employees. They're in-house employees that are based just offshore. When do things go wrong with remote staff? They generally go wrong when you try to outsource work to them. So when you want them to independently be project managed, that's when things will generally go wrong with remote staff. So keep that in mind. I mean, that's something that does happen with us a lot. We do get a lot of clients coming to us and basically wanting remote staff to work independently. So if you want somebody to take the project management burden off your shoulders, you're much better off going for conventional outsourcing models or project or process outsourcing models and not remote staff. There can be that lure to hire remote staff for project outsourcing because there are other advantages, but again, I would not recommend that. So conventional outsourcing is the third main model. And again, you can just think about conventional outsourcing from a local perspective to appreciate how it works offshore. Just think about it locally. When you outsource work here in the UK, how does the process work? So let's take, for instance, just as an example, a law firm. If a law firm wanted to outsource its web development, what happens in that process? Well, they don't project manage the work. The IT company does that, right? And you don't really interact with the web firm or the IT firm that much. It's just a sporadic interaction. It's maybe once every 2 weeks. How's the web development coming along? This is real traditional outsourcing, conventional outsourcing. This is where outsourcing started from. And so if you want to appreciate how conventional outsourcing works offshore, just think about how it works here locally in the UK. It's the same process. So you don't project manage the work. There's low levels of interaction, and it's more suitable for explicit knowledge. So work with a high explicit knowledge component. And that's quite obvious. Again, if you have a lot of tacit knowledge, how are you going to outsource that in one go? It's very difficult. You can't explain something which you might have spent weeks and months thinking about. You can't explain that in one go to another person. That's literally impossible. So that's when conventional outsourcing goes wrong, when people try to outsource work with a high tacit knowledge component. So why do people outsource in the first place? What is this model really designed for? It's really designed for, firstly, for your non-core work. So work which you no longer want to think about and you just want to outsource it to another company and just be free of the burden. But it should be your non-core competency work. And the second reason people really outsource is when they don't have expertise in that given area. So if you think about it again in a local perspective, a law firm, they don't have expertise in web development, so that's why they outsource. It's the same when you're offshore outsourcing. So you can really appreciate this model if you just think about it from a local perspective, because the process is exactly the same. So once you've come to the end of step 4, this process will these stages will firstly show you how different all the different models are from each other, and you can really start to appreciate just what a different experience you're going to get with each model. And the second thing is, now also what you can do is, it's very easy for you to match up which model is suitable for your work. Because you have essentially there are 2 lists, and you just need to look at the list and see which ones align up with each other. So if your work, let's take an example, if you have a set of work where you want high levels of project management control and high levels of interaction, then you know, okay, I'll go for a remote staffing model. And that's why this process helps to break things down a lot. Whereas a lot of other clients will just rush into the process. They won't be thinking in these terms of project management or interaction. And what that will do is it will result in you probably choosing the wrong model. So that's why it's very important to think in these steps. And I should warn you that I've only really gone over kind of the main and significant differences. There can be a lot of other subtle differences as well. So that's where you investing time is so very, very important. Because as I said, you will even see differences within a company. There might be 2 models and within one company, and there might be subtle differences between how you work.